now remove my pin, so that everyone should be able to view us.
Hi, everybody.
If you have any questions during this meeting, just write so in chat or any way you like, and it will all be fine. So today we're going to talk a bit about collaborative approaches to Wardley mapping. So if you haven't checked up on Wardley mapping, I hope it will all become known during this session. But we're going to check, right? This Wardley mapping is actually really nice. A lot of people are doing it nowadays, but how can we actually collaborate on them? Within the DDD community, we like collaborative modeling, right? But what are the different types of approaches here, and how could we, what are the pros and cons, and when should you use what? So we opened the Miro board, and I'm going to share my screen for each and everyone to see. That's the first check. Can everyone see it? Great. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give it over to Ben, and he'll explain the first approach. And from there, we're going to take it off. But before you start introducing the approach, Ben, maybe tell a bit more about yourself.
Oh, exciting. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Mosior, and I run a little website for Wardley Mapping called learnwardleymapping.com. You may have encountered me on the internet, either willingly or unwillingly. Either way, hello, and it's good to see you again. And I spend a lot of time working with folks, learning how to facilitate mapping, doing mapping, all sorts of stuff like that. And I've noticed some things. I've noticed some things that work, and I've noticed a lot more things that don't work. So I thought, like Kenny and I talked a little bit about talking through some approaches to facilitating Wardley mapping that might be interesting and suited for particular circumstances. And also, I think over the process of walking you through these, I think we'll uncover some things, maybe some assumptions that a lot of people have about mapping in general and facilitating mapping in particular that might not be true, or might at least be worth thinking about in a different way. So with that, the first approach we thought we might get into today is one called Together Alone. And in case that sounds familiar, I am, yes, completely stealing this from the design sprints community. And I think for each of these approaches, we have a couple columns in Miro, which I guess we want to invite folks to write down pros and cons as we notice. Is that right, Kenny?
Yeah, but maybe if people don't know what Together Alone means, can we?
Yeah, let's get into it. So we got the approach. We'll explain kind of what it is. We will then talk about pros and cons. We'll kind of, after we demonstrate how it's used and all that. And then maybe we'll get into some heuristics of when to use it, when not to use it, that kind of thing. So Together Alone is an approach where you have everyone working on the same task, but separately. So it's not so much a together activity, but a separate activity, but we are doing it together. I don't know if I'm not explaining that well, but it looks like making maps, individual maps, and it could be on like a Zoom call like this, where we're all in Miro and we're all making individual maps in Miro. Or it could also look like making individual maps at home. Like we could be on a Zoom call together, and I could have like a handy dandy notebook, something like this, and I could have my mapping templates, or I could just be using a back of a napkin or a piece of paper, and everyone could be doing the same exact thing, but we're doing the mapping process together. And then what you'd follow it up with is something like, a little bit of cross-pollination, a little bit of sharing, a little bit of compare and contrast. And I think the reason that this approach is useful is because coordinating and facilitating a mapping session can be a little bit hard if you're not sure how to do it. So doing individual things and just basically treating that like a divergence cycle, and then coming back together and sharing and cross-pollinating and so on, converging just a little bit by exposing each other to each other's ideas, I think that can lead to awesome discussions and awesome realizations like, oh, I didn't know that this is how that worked, and that sort of thing. So that's kind of the approach, I think. And oh, I like the image, Kenny. This is great. Yeah, so we're all in the same room or in the same Zoom call, all working on our own maps. And I think what this does is it allows each person to make like a tentative commitment to how they think things work or how they think things ought to work. Because Wardley mapping is about modeling. It's about making sense of the messes that you're in. Another way to look at it is your systems have been designed more or less on purpose or accidentally. And so sometimes organizations have knowledge debt where they don't even know why decisions were made. They happened by default or by accident. And coming to terms with that and recognizing that is really important. Individually, we all see different parts of the system. You've probably seen the Blind Man and the Elephant, that comic. There's a kind of a beauty to that where we all are seeing different ends of the system. Some of those ends are more glorious than others at times, but one way or another, all of those views are valid, right? So it's good to help individuals understand what they think before collaborating and cross-pollinating those ideas. Oh, hey, look at that. Fun fact, I did find the citation for this comic. It was from, I think, Elephants in the Uremia, something about kidneys, some sort of scientific publication. I tweeted it at one point, but it's out there.
Anyone have any questions about the approach itself? I hope it's a bit clear. So maybe we can then go to the pro cons of it. So for this pro con, just pick a sticky, write a pro, write a con. So I'll start just to show you a con. I'm against branching. So I would say long running maps can be a really pain here. If we take too long, it will be harder to merge. So
that's true.
Pick one, but the con is you can Dumbledore it, right? And I mean, well, everyone's just putting it on their own map and then for us to share. So dump and share. So now it's up to each one, and that's including us. Write down what you think would be a pro or a con, and yeah.
Awesome. We're gonna do some wisdom of the crowd stuff.
Exactly, and then see if we can get to some new learnings. So
yeah, I'm gonna put one down. It seems like this approach avoids negotiation about the model.
I was just about to say avoid conflicts.
That's true, yeah.
Which can be good, but can also be a bad thing. So it's both sides.
Conflicts trigger innovation, right?
Sorry, Alexei?
Conflicts trigger innovation.
Yeah, so that if you keep avoiding it, you might go fast, but if you not manage it, then it avoids that. So I see a question about, are we individually putting it? Yeah, please. So we're just keeping talking, and if someone wants to share and dump and put their mic up, like Alexei just did, thank you. Please do so as well. So it's an open session. It's collaborative. So if you want to just share and dump.
One pro I'm writing down, and this is my opinion, so I haven't run this by Simon or anyone else. I think it's really interesting. Like I see a lot of teams start mapping, and then they immediately get stuck negotiating about one minor detail, and they'll like go rabbit hole on some issue, and they'll never come back out, and then everyone's frustrated and low energy. So part of what I think is helpful, sort of ripping the design sprint kind of approach to this, is like, let everyone be individuals for a moment and get their thoughts on paper. And then we're comparing artifacts, comparing maps, instead of comparing brain thoughts in the air.
That's similar to what we would do in event storming, right? Most of the time, just dump first and then structure later, which is actually a nice approach.
Yeah. Yep.
However, what I see in event storming, and I might see it here as well, different levels of abstraction, right? So that might be a con if you like have a huge gap in level of abstraction.
That's a really good point. And there is some value to having contrast, both in terms of level of abstraction, but also time spans. Like some folks make maps that are really nitty gritty and detailed and oriented around those 2 weeks like sprints or whatever, while others have like market size components that are moving at like years. Like it takes years to see movement, basically. There is value to cross-pollinating those different perspectives, but you do run the risk of confusion. Like, I don't understand why the heck you put that on your map. I don't get it. So there's a little bit of that to work through.
And Ben, also, maybe you mentioned that, but I missed that. So the user need is kind of the same, I guess, but the value stream can be different on a per person basis. So how are they working on the same Wardley map? I just trying to.
Yeah, it's a good point. And so one of the things that I try to teach people is that Wardley mapping isn't an all or nothing activity. I think people get really caught up on like the mechanics of making a Wardley map, which looks like identifying users, identifying their needs, identifying the capabilities that come together to meet those needs and the relationships between them, the dependence, and then finally talking about evolution. And by the time you actually make a map, you've probably had like 1,000 different little mini conflicts and conversations. And so what I try to emphasize is that like oftentimes it's better to take a more incremental approach to like working together. So like, can we even agree on who the users are? Like, I've been in enterprise contexts where that is not easy. So
because they don't have the users.
Not at all.
it's really hard.
And this is where I see the biggest possibility of failing to have totally diverted maps.
Yeah.
And then you find it out after 2 weeks. So the combination of long feedback and single branches could be really fatal.
That's a very good point. And I think the third one down in our list of approaches, the humble list, I'm excited to talk about that one because I think there's a way for us to avoid that long-lived branch problem. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about that a little bit. But to answer Zovia's question, I think the different perspectives are valuable. There is a difference here. Like, so the value chain in Wardley mapping isn't quite the same as a value stream. So it's a kind of a different concept. Value chains have to do with dependence of capabilities or activities. Whereas value streams are more about like flow over time from workstation to workstation. And so when we think about you see the same exact problem with both, actually. It's like you have different views of how the system is working and how it's supposed to work. And having those different views written down is super valuable as long as they're not so far apart that people can't talk to each other.
Yep.
Because if they can't talk to each other, then it all falls apart. And that's definitely one of the dangers with this. Depending on how many different kinds of perspectives you have in the room, you do want that diversity so you get like the different ends of the elephant. But if it's too far apart and you don't have people to translate or ways of speaking commonly with each other, it can get really rough.
The combination is the bad one. If just like working alone for half an hour or something and then putting everything together, it's perfect, but not for weeks.
Yeah, it is the horrible phrase, it depends, right? It's like, it really depends on who's in the room.
So I have one, and I see it maybe pop over more time, but ranking can crush this, right? As in, if you have a culture that's so misaligned, and we can handle different, but same type of different, right? So if people aren't aligned that much and the maps are just too different, it's like, what are you? What is this?
Right.
I can't even, right? So that can be, yeah. And I've seen this also in other collaborations, right? If they're so misaligned on their shared, there needs to be already or you need a good facilitator who, well, they're getting into chaos, right? We didn't know we're so misaligned. Now we know, but I don't want this, right? So,
yeah.
Anyone else has something to share?
Did we just found a heuristic with this not long-running branches? Separate working on the same task alone, but not too long. So not for the defined time, not a long time span. Somehow like something like this.
Yeah. And I guess you need to have a sort of like a shared goal to work on it, I guess.
This is a good idea, I think, for everything.
Well, sometimes I use event storming to actually get the goal clear, to get people on the same goal. And
Okay, but we are on Wardley mapping, so
yeah, but that's what I mean. So that's not.
Yeah, we should note this.
I
if it is needed, then yeah.
Maybe different approaches could actually help as well doing that. I'm not sure. Maybe this can help.
That's a good point, actually, about it's possible. So one of the things that my mentor, Jay Bloom, would say about this is that sometimes it's easier to build up from the bottom first, sort of like understand what strategies people already think are in motion, and then work with those as an like. So if we're assuming an executive perspective on this, which I think is not a fair assumption generally, but start with what people think is happening. And that's where like the discovery of what the common goal could be might be the outcome of that. So if you get everyone to sit down and say, okay, I want you to make a map of what you think we're doing as a company. Like that, I guess that counts as a common goal, at least for the session, but the real intent is for a bunch of different people to come up with a bunch of different things of what they think is already happening. And then it makes the differences conspicuous. And then you can come together around a common goal for the company and make a new set of maps about that. So I think there is the discovery part of that too, but it all depends.
Yeah, and this one, I think it's also hard when you have people in the room that don't know how to map yet. Then you get I cannot actually express myself now, and that can cause more conflict. While, for instance, if you do a more collaborative one and someone just draws the map and the rest are storytelling, then they don't actually need to know how to map from the start, which also have its own downsides again, but we'll discuss that later.
Yeah. There is a variant of this that I'll do sometimes with folks where I kind of take an authoritarian approach to the mapping process, and I keep everyone in step as we go along. And it requires some like dramatic oversimplifications of the process. Like, okay, everyone choose one user. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to choose one user. And then, okay, everyone pick one need from that this user has. Okay, everyone now pick 3 components for that user. And so keeping the entire room in lockstep like that can work. But also it's probably annoying to have that subjected to you, or like to be subjected to that over and over again. I think it's okay the first time when you're just learning how mapping works, but after that, you probably want to be a little bit more independent.
Yeah, so that can also, did you see that people have different speed of expressing?
Yeah, some people get done faster.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the ways people get stuck with Wardley mapping is they get too big too quickly with their map, and they just get lost in the details. And then like one small area of uncertainty can throw off their entire process. And like, that's a good thing to struggle with if you're used to mapping and you kind of understand the process. Like struggle is good there because it means you're thinking and engaging with the ideas. But if you're just getting started, it's just frustrating. Like I'd rather you end up with a really wrong map that you can then improve incrementally. And like, as you like realize things, recognize that you have different questions, like start with the wrong thing first and then make it better over time. That's going to be a better move if you're beginning, like a beginner with this kind of stuff, because it keeps the energy levels high, and also you find stuff out. It's like, oh, I didn't know that.
Cool. So is there anything, so when maybe some other people have an answer, let's go a bit to the heuristics, right? When should we use this one? So good when the branches are short, good when there's a shared goal. Anything else? When would you use this? Maybe someone sees something in a pro and con list as well that struck, like, this is a nice insight now. Gives me that pointer when to use it.
When the people have the same level of experience, or almost the same, so it's not very extreme, but everybody has already had one Wardley mapping session, and when they already had at least one, maybe this would be more important.
Yeah. So would you need a good facilitator here, right? That can help.
But how, you cannot facilitate if everybody working alone.
4 is okay, just looking at them, but 12 would be good.
Although I will say, I've run a session with 70 people before where we were all mapping together alone. And because I assumed that nobody knew anything and that we were starting from scratch because of the way the event was marketed and so on, I was able to take that more authoritarian approach and literally lockstep everyone to each step of the process because nobody knew what to do next, right? So nobody went running ahead. And if people had questions in the moment, they could speak up and then others could answer. And so that did work, but that does require a very strong facilitation style. And I think you run a lot of risks by being an authoritarian facilitator.
Yeah. Okay.
70, you mentioned? 70? Wow.
Yeah, that was the most we did. I think the approach actually scales up as long as you have enough capacity to answer questions. So I feel like you could probably run that with 150 people if and only if you were able to answer questions in the moment without getting too sidetracked. Like if you had 60 to 90 minutes to do it, you could definitely make everyone's first minimum viable map, which for me, that means telling everyone to exercise extreme restraint around how many components they put in the map. And I literally say you're not allowed to have more than one user, not allowed to have more than one need, not allowed to have more than 3 components. And then we're going to get all the way through the mapping process with just that tiny map, the tiniest map, and then we can expand from it if we have time. And that seems to help people. It does mean they're limited in what they can find out in that session, but there's a really good chance that enough of those people get an exciting kind of insight just from that simple exploration.
Well, sometimes it's quality over quantity, right? So
yeah. One of the things I will say real quick is that with mapping, the closer you look, the more you'll find. And that's very frustrating for a lot of people because they don't know which maps to make, but you just got to start. And the closer you look, you'll find stuff. It's great.
Cool. So we've been a few minutes in. Shall we take the next one up? Which one should we pick?
I have one observation that
Go ahead.
we found way more cons than pros.
Yep.
Yeah, you're right. Well, I'm not sure if we have many duplicates. Did you check as well, Alexei? So I'm not sure if there's a lot of con duplicates.
And the number of cons does not necessarily mean that the approach is bad. It just means we've been very good at defining the places where we shouldn't use it.
Yeah, Him, a good friend of mine, always says we're always better at finding cons than pros. So that's why we start with pro, because it's a lot harder to find. In this case, we do both at the same time. Maybe we should try to just pinpoint pros and then go to cons. Let's do that next one as a small experiment, right?
In general, I say too, don't be dissuaded by cons. Just try it. What's the worst that could happen, right? You have a bad, spend 15 minutes on one of these approaches, and if it doesn't work for you, just throw it away. It's fine. There's plenty of others to try.
So which one did we do? We have anarchy, the list, the secret map, fishbowl, small group diverge come first, 1, 2 for all, small group critique, small group cross-pollination, and ensemble mob. Anyone has a strong feeling towards one of these?
Anarchy.
Anarchy. Good. It's chosen.
Excellent. So
anarchy. Can you
anarchy? Yes. Yeah. I'm mostly kidding about this, but there is something anarchic about it, maybe. So the approach that Simon Wardley teaches in his book, which is free, you can find it at learnwardleymapping.com/book if you're still catching up on the whole book thing. If you look at his book, the way that he describes mapping is basically just get a bunch of people in the room with some post-it notes and a whiteboard, or I guess more commonly today in a Zoom room with a Miro board or mural or whatever you're using, and just figure it out, follow the steps, right? So decide on a user together, decide on the needs that you're going to meet, decide on all the components and negotiate about that. And I think this is a fabulous process for a team that is already on the same wavelength and already is able to have those conflict conversations very comfortably. Where it is really hard to do is when you're trying to convince something that this is a legitimate approach. One of the challenges with Wardley mapping, and probably with any advanced methodology, is that you have a legitimacy problem, right? First and foremost, and then you have a literacy problem. So even if you think the method is legit and it's worth trying, you have the second hurdle, which is to figure out how to do it. And with Wardley mapping, one of the most dangerous parts about getting started there is that it looks like a lot of work for an unknown, questionable payoff. And I can guarantee you that I can sit down with anyone and make a map with them and we'll find things that are valuable to them. But when you're self-guided, oof, it just looks like a lot of work. So anarchy, if you get a bunch of people in the room and they're like, yeah, let's just figure this thing out, could work really great. But it might also be really frustrating if you have no idea what to do and no idea where to get started. So any questions on what anarchy looks like? Anything I should be more clear on? Or do you all experience anarchy regularly enough that you don't need an explanation? I just hear a long sigh.
Yeah, just explain.
So did I put that out correctly? Get a bunch of people in the room, and then
work together on a common map, on a common whiteboard, Miro board, what have you, and go step by step through Simon's process of users, needs, components, evolution, value chain, all that fun stuff. It's like a group reading club, maybe, like a book club. And this is actually the approach that I first learned mapping through. I had a colleague.
Same here.
Yep, we basically locked ourselves in a conference room for 2 weeks and figured it out. Because we were like, how the heck do you do this? It took us a long time, yeah.
So,
Ben, a question. One of the struggles that I've always felt is there are two ways to look at problems, right? In order to, as we generally call formulating the mess, right? Try to understand where things are, and then there is a solutioning mindset that comes in. And one of the problems that I've felt is whenever we're trying to do mapping, you keep jumping between trying to formulate the mess and jumping into trying to find a solution.
Yes.
And that causes a big issue. So how do you find that balance? Should we stop thinking about solution before we have really understood what we are trying to do, or we keep oscillating between the two, like an iterative maze?
I think if you context switch rapidly like that, you're gonna, in many cases, of course there are exceptions and everything depends on everything, but like, I think generally speaking, you'll fatigue people by that rapid jumping back and forth. And what I tend to say is that with Wardley mapping, and you use the term formulating the mess. And so I'm thinking of Russ Eckhoff and Donald Schoen, and the idea of problems don't come to you nicely formulated because we're in the swamp whenever we're practitioners doing work for real, right? It's nice for us to have the lofty theory that we're working on about how things ought to work. And I think like when we read Wardley mapping and it's like, oh, right, we just got to follow the theory and then it'll be fine. In reality, it's messier. And so I think there are actually 3 distinct things that are happening. I think there's a mess that needs to be formulated. And then I think there's a problem from that mess that needs to be selected and defined. And you might have to go reformulate parts of the mess in order to define that problem well. And then you can talk about what to do about it. And in Simon's view for strategy, right, it's about, should we intervene here or should we intervene here?
Local level, yeah.
And it's really, really hard to have all those conversations at the same time. It's also annoying if you try to artificially separate each of those conversations. People will get frustrated because they get excited. So it's really, really hard to get the right balance. In general, I would say get any map out. If people are focusing on solutions or focusing on problems, it's fine. But what you need to be able to do is just have artifacts that you can compare and contrast. And I think the questions that you get from different people's maps will lead you to different kinds of conversations that are more or less rewarding. And so follow the rewardingness of the questions that you can ask. And I think for the most part, that problem starts to sort itself out. People do love solutions, right? They just want, I do it too. And honestly, I start with solutions sometimes because I don't know how else to start. I don't even know how to define the mess. I don't know what problem I'm solving. I just feel deep down intuitively that I need to like use this software or whatever to do this thing. Like I made a map recently about moving off of Eventbrite for my events. Why did I want to move off Eventbrite? I don't know. It just felt wrong to use Eventbrite.
Yeah.
And I think deep down we do have these intuitions that we need to listen to, but then we should go double check that they're right. And that's where you can back yourself into a map.
Correct. So if you take a kind of a solutioning approach, then, and it happens, right? Sometimes you have a solution in mind and you're trying to clearly take it back to, are you really solving the right problem? In the other hand, you actually are even trying to understand where the problem is there.
Yes.
So you can try both way probably. And as usual, balance is somewhere in the middle problem. Yeah.
So I usually also use something called, because mostly solutions that early comes from judgments and are mostly even heuristic. So I would like to map them separately somewhere. At least they're there now, making an explicit that we can let go of them. So we don't have the fear of missing out on that solution. At least they're there. So saying things like, no, we cannot talk about solution actually is a negative connotation, right? Because then people say, oh, I did a bad thing. And then it's what they say in meditation, right? Try to be in the moment. And if your mind drifts, say that it's okay and let it go. Right? Don't tell yourself that it's wrong, because it's actually not wrong to think in solutions, but just say it's not right now and see if you can just make it somewhere explicit. So if you just say as a facilitator they're wrong, then people will swallow it. And same with, well, I do a lot more events from Wardley Mapping, right? If I say you need to do an event in past tense, then people stop writing. And I don't want that. I just want them on the board. And later on, we can refactor.
I think that makes sense. That's a good idea. Thank you.
I think the what that points at too is you don't make a map and solve all your problems and be done, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like mapping is an ongoing I'm mapping in my head right now. You can't stop me.
Exactly.
So but like, it's not just the methodology, right? It's like, we're making sense of things. We're trying to define messes. We're trying to understand them, understand where the problems are. We're doing that all the time, and it's an ongoing process. And so what would you have to do to make that a sustainable, ongoing process for years to come? And I think the answer is don't punch people in the face whenever you're facilitating something.
Absolutely.
So shall we go back to the board?
Yeah.
And see a few things. Very fast feedback. No need to convince people. A nice team experience. Serendipity to the max can lead to a high number of discoveries. Just get it out there. Comfortable conflict conversation. Shared discovery. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Any more positive things that we can think in anarchy? So I guess you starting with chaos. Yeah, I like it. It's not for everyone, so we can go to the cons later. But chaos. This is actually a quote, I think, from the Avatar, the Airbender movie. Like, you need to destroy things in order to rebuild them up, and anarchy is. So someone muted me.
I tried to let Jürgen in, and and the chat list moved, and then it was chaos. Sorry, I just tried it out.
I was hitting the admit button, so I think I did that to you. I'm sorry.
Nice.
We were both contributing factors, no root cause.
So not very much fuss and setup. You have a common goal. Okay, let's go to the cons. So
I see someone wrote hippo. Yep.
Can someone who not knows hippo can explain what it means?
All I know is I don't want to encounter one in the water. Apparently vicious animals.
Highest paid person's opinion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Highest paid. Yeah. Yeah. Ranking is a challenge everywhere, right? Yeah.
I don't think it's a difference if in the end you still need to overcome this somehow. Just not to invite them. That's the way to solve the elephant in the room problem.
There's always somebody that gets paid the most, Christine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
you promote the second most paid person to the hippo.
Yeah. And the louder one.
Yeah.
I wrote here, I imagine it is a great team building experience, or even to make the team even better, because to this anarchy, you find your way as a team, as a bunch of people. You agree, otherwise you don't come to the end. So at the end, you have a common goal and a common strategy, because the goal is not to have the map, but to have a strategy afterwards. Is this true, or it could be the wrong goal or wrong strategy, or that they are not agree? Can this happen?
I think you'll certainly exacerbate existing group dynamics and disagreements. There's oftentimes different layers of problems happening with group dynamics, right? Like people will be using a word, but they mean two different things. Like that happens all the time, right? And the quality of verbalizing our thoughts oftentimes can break down, and we misunderstand each other. We won't be able to actually communicate very well. And maps do help with that. Like, because you're basically making commitments by writing words down, and then you're having conversations and disagreements. And those disagreements often highlight those areas of of where like you have different mental models, different views of the world. And so at least now they're conspicuous, but they don't help you problem solve. They don't help you conflict resolve. Doesn't help you converge into one right answer, right? I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so one thing I noticed with these things is it's two-sided. So some people need to know the why, the who, the what before they can actually start doing stuff, right? Why am I here? Who are the people inside the room? So if that's not clear, then it's hard. And second, I see this a lot in collaboration. People stop making it explicit quickly, right? So people love, like me, I do it myself as well a lot of times, just stop writing things down and start discussing with words. And yeah, so you stop mapping quickly.
But then it is a con. Then it
Yeah,
would be together alone much better.
Yeah, I've put that in a con. Yeah. Okay. So any questions, any other things before we can go to the heuristics? So can we, so I have one heuristic here already, which goes into great if you have a good, and I write this in capitals, team. So not a group of people. If you really are a team, I've done this in a team, group of people who were close, and then I love the anarchy. Let's just try and see and just do and together on one map and just try it with stickies or whatever.
I'm adding to that. I think at least someone has to have experience with mapping in the room.
Yeah.
So that they can, it could be a teaching moment, a learning moment as well.
Yeah, or at least read the book to know what to do.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I did. I mapped to myself and then just went into the group of people I knew. And it's like, let's try this. I don't know how. That was actually basically people came there and can you tell us? And I'm like, I don't know. I just read 2, 3, 4 chapters and that's all I know. But it actually worked. The conversation was nice.
Yeah, I think the bar for getting value from this process is really low, right? Even if you, don't succeed in success, like in making a map, for example. Like you still have all these lovely discussions along the way about users' needs, etc. I mean, if you even just had a separate conversation about evolution on its own, Simon's research around evolution is like super interesting to all sorts of people just by itself. And that's okay. That'll get you a lot of interesting discussions.
Exclude the hippo, yeah. Well, that's what I say. I wouldn't do this if I know, well, personally, I would not do this when there's a lot of ranking going on there and people aren't aware of that ranking.
This is what I meant.
Yeah.
Not the fact that somebody is most highest paid, but that everybody, that he or she behaves like that.
Yeah, and I have a bit of a mixed feeling about exclude.
Yeah, me too. But if you want,
maybe manage, facilitate.
You can choose another kind of mapping then. So why not put it there? And if you want this chaos, then you have to be on the same level and trust and respect. So
yeah, so maybe if there's that culture, then you shouldn't do this. Maybe you should do another one that does more of right. Liberating structure always says, right, we're doing this to balance out the power.
Yeah. So, and the heuristics are here to be honest and helpful and not politically correct or unpolitical, whatever. So to be able to make decisions after that.
I think it's important to recognize the culture behind the hippo situation and manage it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the hippo themselves that are the problem in that they are going to override everybody. But more often, it's everyone around them. If they see what they say, they'll just agree. And so if you know that's the situation, you can work with that person who is the hippo to say, make sure you put your stuff up anonymously and discuss it, the ideas, as if they're on the screen, regardless of who put them there. So it's don't identify that was my idea, right? Just identify the idea and argue with it. Even argue with your own ideas and get people to, if you can get that hippo person to play along and say, and to debate their own ideas, right? And so make it not obvious, this is mine, everyone should agree, then that kind of, there are techniques and it really depends on the culture that you're in. And so being purposeful about that hippo situation, I would say, is my recommendation.
So that would be another collaboration technique, Rick. I don't think anarchy would work because people will just be in a room and everyone knows what's up. So wouldn't that be a different approach to mapping, would you say?
I think there are lots of variations.
I think it depends. I think it depends on the situation, even in person, right? If the hippo says, I'm going to put down half-baked ideas and I really need you people to challenge them. Yep. Like, I don't want to have fully formed ideas and I don't want to lead this thing. I want to participate. I need your help. The moment, if you get the hippo person to say, I need your help, I need to be able to put half-baked ideas and have them question. That's what I need out of this exercise.
Yeah.
Say that, that's not even explicit permission. That's a challenge, right? Please challenge my ideas. So the moment that happens, it frees everyone up. They've been asked to, right? And so again, it really depends on the culture, whether that's just one example of many, but really being, what I say is being more explicit about your situation and the purpose and having that hippo person on side with that if you can.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be because it's the right thing to do. You can say, how awesome are you if you can tolerate this level of critique compared to your peers? Like that's an interesting way to bait them into being willing to be transparent and to at least play the part for the moment. The other thing that I'll do for modulating hippos in a facilitation context is I will try to heighten their cognitive load during the session in some way so that they're a little bit too busy to kick into gear and provide opinions quickly. That's harder to do than to say. So I'll just hint at that and let the rest of you think about that one a little bit.
So let's go to the next one, okay? And people can still write some of them here. which one would we pick up? So we've got the list, the secret map, ensemble mob, fishbowl, small group critique, small group diverse converge, and we've got 1 to 4 all and small group cross collaboration. So anyone
what is
has
secret map?
the
It's
secret
very
map?
tempting. Yes.
Well, you decide now, so thanks. So
It's a secret.
It's a secret.
then that's it.
Okay.
Right?
Excellent. So there's an orthodox way of doing Wardley mapping and rolling it out into an organization. And then there's an unorthodox way, which I tend to be a proponent for. And the orthodox way has to do with something called spend control. And in Simon's world, spend control is something that you do with basically projects where for a product above some cost threshold, let's say if you're going to launch a project that's going to cost me more than 20,000 euros or something like that, please, you have to make a map before you can launch it. That's spend control in a nutshell. And Simon, he's thinking about the executive perspective and people who have power over others in the organization and who can, set policies like that. And also he's thinking about this context where there's a central mapping group that collates maps from across the organization and so on and so forth. And I think all that's well and good if you have the ability to emplace those kinds of policies and you're able to sort of facilitate that and all the social costs of that and so on. I tend not to be the person who comes from that perspective. I'm often working with individuals who are, they see something really, really important that they need to do and need to accomplish, and they have to rise to the occasion, but they don't necessarily have the authority to just, steer the ship one way or another and use power over to get what they want. So the secret map is kind of a, it's kind of a way around this problem. And it's a way of sneaking mapping into the organization without distracting everyone with the legitimacy or literacy problems of Wardley mapping. If folks are less interested in trying it out. So, and it's pretty simple. If you know how to map, when you're in meetings, just make a map. And you don't have to show anybody. You can just keep it inside your notebook or on your, in your own private Miro board or whatever. And when folks are debating about certain topics or asking certain questions, I think the idea behind the secret map is that through high quality action, i.e. being the person who knows more than everyone else because you've mapped it out, you're able to sway opinions, you're able to ask the right question at the right time, you're able to earn the influence that you start to have in those meetings. And over time, people are going to start to ask you, how the heck did you get that? How did you find that? And I think that's a moment of potential influence for sharing mapping with people who are interested and so on. I wrote a blog post about this. I think it's called "Nobody Cares About Your Precious Framework." And this is my unorthodox way to promote Wardley mapping.
You'll put it in Miro, I guess.
I will, yeah, just pasting it in here. So that's the secret map. I think you can reveal parts of that map as you're making it. You might say, hey, I was just making a list of users. Can you clarify for me which user we're talking about right now? Who's getting value from this thing that we're arguing about? I mean, you could expose that and say, hey, how is this relevant? or which problem are we talking about? Which part of the system are we talking about? And people will have to sort of verbalize what they think it is, and maybe you can get them to make a list. We skipped over the list, and I think maybe this is a good time to hint at it as well. It's hey, can we at least make a list of users? Or can we make a list of parts that we're talking about just so we can stay focused and point at the one that we're talking about right now and arguing about? And I think that allows us to have a lower likelihood of talking past each other in these conversations if at least one person in the room is oriented, right? They are seeing what's going on and they have a map that they're using and they can stay locked into what is making sense and what isn't. And they'll know right away when the conversation is starting to go off the rails.
Yeah, so one pro for me is that you use the map as a compiler of the conversation, right? So it's like, note, it's not mappable. Now I need to ask a question because it does not compile, right? It's like I'm in my own private IDE and someone's telling me to how to code and I say, no, doesn't compile. What does this mean? Yeah, I like that one.
And I've seen Simon do this too. He'll just sit there sketching, do. Oh, hey, what you making over there?
Well, that would be more of a, maybe we can discuss it later. I like the gorilla mapping. Was it on there as well? Right, you just go to a meeting and just share your screen and just start mapping it while everyone sees it. So that's a bit different than a secret map, but while people talk, you just start quietly map.
Yeah.
And then people start asking questions or say actually that you're wrong. So that will be the gorilla approach. But let's focus on the secret one. So what
I like that too.
People think about this one? So what more pros do we see here? So we battle legitimacy. Sorry.
Yep.
Not English.
English is a silly language.
Well, you haven't tried Dutch.
It's true, I haven't. I've tried German. I'm not good at it though.
German is a lot more structured because
yeah.
We got it teached in the high school, mid school.
All right. Did anyone have any questions as we were talking through that? Anything that we missed? I see folks adding pros and cons, which is great.
We don't have time to discuss with you now.
People are just asking.
I'm not sure if it was clear that we want to do a Wardley map today, but it could be only me. And it could be
true.
one of the surprises.
Oh, this is all meta, I guess. Yeah, we not a lot of mapping happening.
But yes, this battle of legitimacy, I had the chance to see it for 10 months now, 18, and it is terrible. And just this method I am doing all the time, using some kind of visualization, not Wardley mapping, but everything else or anything, and show it, because otherwise they don't get it or they don't want to know about it, because it's also an ego issue. If I don't know it and I say it, then I am the stupid one. So you are the stupid one. This is not valuable. The last sentence was what I heard. We did event storming and the story mapping and user story mapping, and it was great. And after 1 week, I heard back, oh, it's just kind of discussion. It's just another name. It's terrible. This stupidity. Just only not to recognize that it's something maybe they should learn about it or read about it. So showing it is the best way for everything. So, and I'm doing this with DDD just to like, so I don't stop anymore.
Maybe we can at the end select an approach and then next time do the Wardley mapping based on that technique or approach.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So last time, I think a few months ago with Nick, we tried some. I think group anarchy mapping. I think it was already 6 or 8 months ago. But that's actually a good one. We can pick, or we can try them all out in different ways. Right, next time, just send out breakout groups. One will go anarchy, one will go single mop, and then join back in 1 hour and see.
Could be really fun.
So being prepared for critical discussion when they later arise. Yeah. At least someone is making sense of it. Okay, shall we go to the cons? What would be a con of this?
Slow feedback or no feedback.
Yeah, people can still ignore you and listen to the hippo if they're really starstruck, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You really have like a really the CEO is in the room, you can ask all the questions if they like, but if they're really egocentric and yeah.
Yeah, if you can't behave as if you're building something that is a 10-year effort, it's gonna be really hard to participate in a way that where you individually show up and are willing to wait that slow feedback loop. I mean, gaining influence, building relationships, those are like lifetime things, right? And if you're stuck in a situation where you can't invest in that way, yeah, maybe not the right approach, also maybe not the right job.
Yeah, possibly, because you can, I mean, Wardley mapping is not something you are doing like drawing a small program flow or chart or something. It is a bigger thing about strategy and so on. So for you alone, I don't know, you invest a lot to learn this, but you need the company to make a value out of it.
Yeah, I've used it in all sorts of different circumstances. Like I've actually used it for things as small as personal introspection. Like I actually made a map once that was like my well-being value chain, like trying to understand like how exercise and going for walks and things like that, and having a good diet and all this kind of stuff contributes to my well-being as a human. I've also made maps of like how I'm going to apply for jobs, like way back when I left the cubicle world, became a free agent. I was like, maybe I should go get a job. That was a long time ago, but I made a map of the job application process because I was just frustrated by it. And, it's not a strategic insight to say the result of the map was I should be building relationships instead of applying to jobs. That's not particularly strategic. That's actually pretty tactical, all things considered. And I think you can make maps that are like really short-lived and really detailed and technical. Like, hey, which feature are we building? Where does it fit into this big picture? Oh, it's here. Oh, now I know where it is. Okay, good. And so on. So I tend to be a little bit looser with how I use mapping, even though Simon's talking about it for strategy. I'm like, it's basically ontology and making sure that you have an intent for all of the parts that be. How would you like them to be?
You could make a map of all your NPM dependencies, Christina.
No, I don't need Node is doing it for me.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
I have already a tool for it. I don't take another one, but I could make a map for the next intent to buy something electronic stuff from Amazon for my husband.
That's true. Yeah,
he won't like it.
Secret mapper, Christina.
Yeah, on YouTube at the moment.
Maybe just record it for us, and then...
Can we work on this to remove this part?
So not directly shared. Yeah, I think that can be a problem, right? It's not really, like Donella H. Meadows said, expose your mental models directly. It's through questions. So yeah. Okay, shall we go to the heuristics then? It's, one person in the room needs to be oriented. Oh, another con might be, I think, fast talkers. Might that be a problem?
For slow talkers, sure.
If the conversation goes too fast, you might get that annoying person. Wait. And then, what did you say? What did you say? Wait. Actually slowing down the conversation, which can be a good thing, but...
Yeah. There's a mindset that comes with this too, though, which I think is not looking for the overnight success, but looking to make 1% better decisions than you were yesterday. And so even if you don't have a complete map that makes complete sense, can you at least know a little bit more than you knew yesterday? So I think if you set the bar low like that, you start to realize that this is as an ongoing practice, this can be super valuable, even if you have fast talkers. But yeah, if you're trying to like keep the whole room in lockstep with your map, you will struggle.
It also can be a problem if you're sitting in meetings and everybody is listening and one person is looking in his laptop the whole time. This would annoy me for sure.
It's not too unlike all sorts of regular meetings I've seen.
Not my meetings.
Oh.
So I think you could do it when you don't have power or ranking to change. You can just start, right? You can start this doing tomorrow in the next meeting.
You can be someone who's known for high quality action anytime, right?
And through that, you actually are able to make it legitimate at some point.
Right. Yeah. Longer payoff, but the results are unquestionable.
Sure, I think it doesn't. It's nothing against it, but maybe not in the meeting directly, or to choose the right meeting. Because, as I said, if 5 people there and one is not looking at you, but in his or her laptop the whole time, then it could be annoying.
One of the tricks I use in general for that problem is I used to prefer to do typed notes. And so I'd be typing while people are talking because notes are how I keep sense of things. It's how I stay oriented. And so what I started doing instead was going analog, and I do handwritten notes. And so similarly, you could do handwritten maps. There's a workbook that you can get on Amazon. There's like just any piece of paper. If you draw, a couple lines and you have a mapping template there, and you like, even if you're just writing a list of things, if you go into a meeting tomorrow and you've done 0 mapping up until this point, if your only job in that meeting is to make a list of the users that are being impacted by the decisions and the conversations that are happening, and it can be internal users too. It can be like my boss, right? It can be the customer at the end of the whole situation. But if you just make a list of users, congratulations, you're mapping. Like you're doing the process, and I think you can get away with that probably.
I think this would be the best way. So I also always do meeting minutes, but I'm doing it publicly shared, because then you have the common understanding and the common agreement. But to note a few things on a paper, and after that, make it digital and send it to everybody, would be the winner.
Yeah. With great note-taking comes great responsibility and also a lot of influence.
This is why I'm doing it publicly always.
That's why I do it privately.
Okay, cool. So 3rd one down. So I've sensed a bit that people maybe wanted to do a map.
Yeah, I bet we could do one of these methods and just run it with the folks. I'm getting some thumbs up over here.
Yeah, just write +1 in the chat or something. We can try to do like the alone one or the anarchy one. I think the alone one would be interesting. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we could definitely run a together alone map. Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, perhaps. Not sure. Not sure what the rest wants.
Aha. And that includes you folks on YouTube too. I've got the chat open here.
A fitness goal map.
What?
Like getting fit?
Okay.
So someone wants to get fit, right? And you have certain needs for that. What do you need and all that? Might be an interesting way to do that. Everybody probably will do it end of the year or start of the year. It could be a reusable map.
That's a good point. And I know how I have solved that problem, and it is not straightforward. In fact, it involves some custom stuff. Don't tell Simon.
Yeah,
maybe I was thinking like you're going to facilitate your own mapping, right? Next week, or do a mapping next week. We could do a map on that. Real meta level.
I'm down for anything.
Shall we do it? If someone, yeah, I see a few thumbs up. So where do we start, Ben? Should we follow you?
Okay, so
Should we do everyone alone, or should you just? How do you want to do this?
okay, so let's do together alone. And so we're all going to make maps, and I'm going to be an authoritarian because I love being an authoritarian. I'm just kidding. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to start out with some lists, and then we're going to turn those lists into Wardley maps. And then what we can do maybe is to sort of complete the feedback loop. Why don't we come up with a hashtag for everyone to tweet their maps out if they're willing to share after the session, or even if they can copy and paste into the Miro board or something like that. Let's figure out the gathering mechanism so folks can compare maps either during the session or later. But I can just walk people through like an individual process that uses paper and pencil. Does that sound good? Any objections?
I will use a Miro board so people can watch me doing it.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah. Okay, so this process is going to be oversimplified, and if you've done mapping before, you're probably going to be, I don't know, maybe faster than me on this. But we're just going to make some lists first. So find your pencil and paper, and your list is going to have probably about 5 things in it. It's going to have one user, one need, and 3 things we're going to call capabilities. So first things first with your list, pick someone to serve in this context. So if we're making a fitness goal map, who are you going to serve? Who's going to get value from the fitness goal map, from the system that you're going to model? This could be you, could be your family. Dinkar, who are you thinking of?
Yeah, probably self.
All right. My family needs me alive.
Yeah, exactly. So if you are looking at a higher level goal, probably you're going even beyond that. I mean, in days of COVID, you can actually link it back to a healthy person who can fight COVID. So think of that way, a little higher up in the value chain.
Definitely. Yep. And there are all sorts of interesting things we could explore there. Like if you model good exercise, does that help other people model good exercise? I don't know. Anyway.
I had something concrete in mind, Ben, if it makes sense. I just suddenly thought about it.
Go for it.
No, just one aspect of getting fitness, which was about, okay, I want to, and it's an outcome oriented piece where I want to, let's say, I need to get fit for end of the year for a certain event, just for sake of discussion. Okay. And for that, I know that in order to do that, somebody needs to exercise, somebody needs to look at diet, somebody needs to look at few other things, right? And then those become kind of, start doing your needs and then capabilities and other things. So might be, if we just come to one of those, maybe it will be a little more contained and we can go through the whole thing instead of everything. Maybe we look at, I don't know, exercising itself. These days you have options, right? You can go to a gym, you can do home. If you need home, you need to buy something. So we can go through all of that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we can do like a dramatic kind of simplification here. So pick yourself as the user, let's say, in your list. And then, did I see someone with a hand raised? Sorry, blipped past.
I did. I was just dismiss this if it's not relevant. But I think one of the big issues about getting fit is not sustainability of workout and fitness is like the core thing, and not necessarily like setting with diet or exercise. I don't know where that gets accounted for in the map though. So
that's probably one of the dimensions, discipline, right? I need discipline in order to be fit in addition to other things. May not be a physical requirement, but it's some kind of character requirement. So maybe that requires some motivation to be disciplined, a goal to be disciplined, or I don't know, maybe an external indicator. Maybe I need a regular habit app which keeps me disciplined, a reminder. I'm just thinking loud.
Yeah, I'd say I'd think of it as a constraint on your exercise. So let's play it this way, right? So you've got like your little list here, and you've got, I don't know if anyone can see this at all, but you've got your name at the top, maybe you're the user. And underneath that, you've got a need, and the need is for exercise. We're going to oversimplify the needs part of this. I'm just gonna say you need exercise, and we can fight about that at a later time. All right, so you need exercise. Now here's the question of what capabilities are you going to deploy in your life in order to exercise? So what are like 3 activities you're going to do, practices you're going to put into motion, data that you're going to keep track of, or things that you have to know, knowledge? What are 3 capabilities that you'll have to put into practice, put into motion in order to actually fulfill this need of exercise?
Make time for it, for instance.
Time management, yeah, absolutely. Yep. So make a list on your piece of paper. So you can do the time management angle if you want. You can do something else, but figure out like 3 things that you'll have to do, or anything else you would call a capability as a human that you'll have to put into motion in order to meet this need of exercise.
So I have my cat. I have my cat. They want to walk around each evening.
Yeah.
But for that, I need to find time, but more gaps in between Zoom meetings, so I can start walking, block agenda for walking, and eat healthier food. So,
yep.
You are such an anarchist, Kenny. We wanted this fitness map.
This is fitness, but I do it for my cat.
For your cat.
Yeah. My cat's the most. Look behind Ben. See who's the most important person in that house? Cat.
It's true. All curled up. Yeah. Okay. So you've had a couple seconds to think up some capabilities. Would maybe 1 or 2 people like to share what they wrote down? And then I'll maybe add something too. I'll share some of what I do. What capabilities are you putting into motion in order to meet your need of exercise?
Reserve time, make a plan, find a metric.
Yep. That makes sense. 100%. I'd like to hear from one more person. What capabilities do you put into play in order to meet the need of exercise?
Ability to track your progress.
Yeah.
So you can keep yourself honest.
Yep. Excellent. Yeah. I have some similar answers. So I chop wood in order to exercise. I have this existential problem, which is if I'm exercising for no point, I won't do it. So I have to chop wood. And so I've got wood chopping as a capability. I've got an accountability function. If I don't do it, then I have consequences. And then I have heart rate tracking. I need to see how much my heart rate spikes because that tells me, it makes me feel good about whether or not I actually did a good job and got some cardio in, right? So those are the 3 capabilities that I wrote. And now, so this is kind of like your list. Now we're going to convert this list into a value chain. And the way that we do that is we draw lines between these things according to what depends on what else. So in my case, Ben depends on exercise. Exercise depends on wood chopping. Exercise also depends on accountability. And exercise also depends on heart rate monitoring. So since we all have small lists, that's probably a pretty straightforward value chain to draw, but sketch it out real quick. If you have to draw it separately, that's fine. So let me see here, Ben. Just give you a second to do that.
No, I lost it.
What's up?
I was hurrying to create another frame near the cat, so I lost your last part. But you could come to Miro. It's near the cat. It's the fitness map. So yeah.
Oh.
And we could finish it together. I just copied the cat map.
Very nice cat map. Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's mine too. Like I just drew a quick little value chain, and It's pretty straightforward when you don't have a lot of components. It's just, simple relationships. Very nice.
I couldn't read it.
Copycat.
Yeah. So, me, need exercise. Okay. Then you said the 3 capabilities.
Yeah, I see you've got discipline there. I see you have to plan it.
Yeah, it's have to plan it is a capability. It's not a capability, it's still a need.
Well, it points to something, right? Like planning is work to be done. Either you do it or you don't do it. Now, separately, planning could also be a practice. It could be a set of things that you learn how to do in order to plan. Like I need to learn how to manage a calendar.
Okay. Getting things done. Yeah. Okay. And the third one would be, you said you need a goal, not so mindless exercises.
Yep. Something worth doing. And I, in order for me, I do wood chopping, but you might do something else.
Same as for me. My biggest success was as I did boot camp with my colleagues, and it was great. The hardest and the greatest time. And after that, after we didn't get it together anymore, I could make boot camp now too, from online, from YouTube, but I don't do it. It's boring. It's so this is a motivator, isn't it?
Got it.
Wouldn't the goal be the thing that needs exercise in order to reach it? So the goal would be under your name, Christina, and then exercise would be one of the capabilities to reach that goal, or?
Okay, we need a goal here.
I thought you were going to put a goal beneath there instead of motivator. I misunderstood probably. It's okay. Don't mind me.
Oh, you mean here, on the bottom, on the third one?
I'm confusing myself. Please stop and continue what you were doing before.
But I still need a goal, I think. I don't need exercises. Who the hell needs exercise? This is like saying I need to enter my Visa card on the page. No, I don't need. I have to.
You need to have Kubernetes.
It's
this is something else. I need Kubernetes, but I don't need exercises.
Who needs Kubernetes?
I think the important thing is to identify what's the user's perceived need. Right?
Yeah.
And that's really, and I think basically, why do you want to exercise, right? You do the 5 whys until you hit that thing. So why do you want to exercise? I want to feel more healthy. That's your need. Feel more healthy.
Yeah, it's much better.
Plan to do that is, and we're going to do that by exercising. We're not going to look at eating healthy right now. It's not what I care about changing, right?
Y'all are making this so hard. I promise. Like, it's okay to oversimplify on this first round. And like, you're totally right. Like normally, so I just pasted in to Miro this list from nonviolent communication. I learned this from Jennifer Carlson. They describe using these fundamental universally human needs and actually having needs separated into layers. But this is all about like accuracy, right? And like, we don't need accuracy right now. What we need is to finish the damn map, right? Like, so what we're trying to do is get all the way through the process really quickly so that we can come back and say, hey, that need sucks. Let's make it better.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. I think it's really important to identify most of the times when we're mapping and we put the need on, we're actually that's not actually the need. That's our solution to a need. And if you just, and that's okay if you recognize it, if you accept this is a solution to an unarticulated need, but honestly, it's the solution we've chosen. So let's map it. But come back and say, let's identify what that core unarticulated need is, the why. But we don't have to stop mapping. I think Ben is right about that. Just accept it. The need, just draw a circle and say exercise, need, and then me, and just leave it there. I'll come back to you later. It's really important to be obvious about that and explicit and honest, but don't get distracted by it if it's not the time.
And sometimes people just want the solution. Like, I might be hangry, but I just really need some potato chips right now. That's a solution. So that would be my need. That's the solution. So that's okay.
Yeah, but I think it's really important to be explicit that you haven't written the need, and if you're not, once you fill in the map, you're solution blind.
Well, yeah, sure, but I'm going to be really kind of like probably annoying about this. I agree with you 100%, except my assumption is that in many organizations, none of this is happening. They're not even aware that like who the users are, right? So I want to set the bar even lower than that. Don't even get distracted by this if you're in an organization that can't talk about users and needs yet. Like, get something on the page and keep moving. You can have that conversation later. Even in a more advanced organization that is starting to learn the basics of how to be intentional about the systems that they're designing, then yeah, like you move on to the next thing, which is let's be very clear that the solution is not the need. And David Hall, my facilitation partner for a lot of my workshops, makes the exact same point, right? If you're saying the user needs your product, you are confused because they don't. But I say for teams that are new to mapping, just get them to get stuff on the page, even if it's wrong. The point is to get them all the way to the end so they get value from mapping, and so they make mapping a continuous ongoing activity and they don't get drained by the process by arguments in the middle. And so with that in mind, what I want to focus on next is evolution, right? So we've got components and we've got to talk about evolution, because in mapping, what we do is we give position meaning. From left to right, how evolved is this component? And I don't know if you can see this, but this giant, horrible cheat sheet is terrifying to look at, but also very helpful, right? So you can get a copy of it at lwm.events/evolution if you need a copy of it to look on your own. But this giant cheat sheet, right? Basically what it is it's saying that everything evolves in Simon's view from left to right under the forces of supply and demand competition, right? So evolution is a constant under capitalism, for better or for worse. So in each of these stages, activities, practices, data, and knowledge have distinctly different qualities, right? So in stage one, for example, things are rare, they're high failure, it's high potential future value, but like if it works at all, it's a miracle. So you compare stage 1 to stage 4, where it's commodity, where failure surprising, it's generally extremely certain. We're talking about, driving down the cost of things to as close to zero as possible, and so on. And so what you're trying to do is basically have the oversimplified version of this whole thing's a spectrum, right? And there are boundaries, but the oversimplified version is to categorize stuff. So for everyone who's still, making the maps and following along, what I'd say is just go through your list of components in your value chain and put a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4 next to that item in the value chain, depending on whether you think it's in stages 1, 2, 3, or 4. And I'd say, don't make this harder than it has to be. Again, I value being wrong first, as long as you're going to come back and iterate, right? So just take a gut feeling guess, like, oh, this feels like a stage 1 thing. This feels like a stage 3 thing. And use this table as a way to guide your decision. And yes, again, you're going to be wrong. If you map the same thing with a bunch of other people, you'll notice that you all have different opinions about stuff. And that's great. Go have discussions about that. But get through this exercise, just 1, 2, 3, or 4. All right.
So Ben, question of mapping like this for this example. So when I'm ranking that 1, 2, 3, 4, I would look at the context which I'm setting that number, right? So for example, in this case, like I put things like on my list, reminders. Like reminders are an important component for me.
Excellent.
Now for me, that 1, 2, 3, or 4. Well, reminders are a really commodity in the world, right? But the question is, for me personally, if I don't have a good reminder system, then I've got an ad hoc thing. So I would the context I would set it in is this context for me in my system, right? And that's really, that stops that helps you set a number quickly, is what's the context of this in my world today? Or what's the context of this in the global market? It's a different question.
It is a different question, and it's such a good point. And sometimes people get stuck on this because they are trying to simultaneously reconcile what's true here, what's true in the wider world, what do we wish were true here, and then also where are things headed in a couple years or in 10 years or what have you? Where are things headed? So there's an element of anticipation that you can get into. I tend to encourage people to map the way things are in the outside market, because then you'll implicitly notice that you're wrong in the way that you treat it, or at least different, right? And then you can make a call about whether that's an important difference, a useful difference, or an unimportant one. But I think starting from current state is also okay too, like current state here. So that's definitely a valid way to do it. So
in this case, like if I put reminders, that's pretty commodity in the outside. But if I'm not actually checking my reminders on a daily basis, so putting them on my calendar wouldn't matter because I never look, right?
Yep.
Then
Recognize
sound like me.
I think that's so I just want to be clear. What's your recommendation on that as an example?
My recommendation is if you're following my together alone practice, which implies authoritarian facilitation on my end, my recommendation is don't worry about it, because the step that we're going to get to next is going to make that question more visible to us, and you'll have that moment of reconciliation.
Okay.
Yeah, so like what we're doing is not traditional mapping, right? We're doing together alone mapping, Ben's opinionated way that is very authoritarian and probably not always the right move, right? So don't worry about it.
Just pick one and go.
Just go. Yep. Go.
But it's a model that you're exposing, right? The 1, 2, 3, 4. It's your model that you're exposing to the outside world. At least it's there exposed.
Yep, we're just trying to get the wrong answer on the page so we can make it more right later.
Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, you've got your things categorized. If you're following along with pencil and paper, what I do next is I draw the map structure, which is basically you draw a line across the bottom of the page, and then you divide the space above the line into 4 sections using 3 lines. Let me see if I can get a Sharpie here. This is usually the way I do it, is I'm like Sharpie and construction paper. Love it. All right, so here's your line across the bottom. 3 lines to divide that space into 4 sections. And now you can label those sections 1, 2, 3, and 4, or if you'd prefer to use like the stage names like Genesis, custom, built, product, and commodity, you're welcome to do that. Simon intermixes those labels, by the way. Like he'll do Genesis, divergent, convergent, commodity. Like, no rules. Honey Badger don't care. All right, so now that you've got your template all written out, now it's time to turn your value chain that you wrote down into the full-blown Wardley map. And so now that you've got those categories, 1, 2, 3, and 4 for each of those components, just write each one in the stage that it corresponds to, somewhere from left to right. So I put wood cutting, wood chopping in stage 2. I don't know if that's right or not, but it seems right. So I'm just gonna put it in my map like that in stage 2. And repeat that for each of the components that you've categorized. And for those of you that I can see, just give me a thumbs up when you've got those components placed. All right.
Where do you want the thumbs up? Zoom, camera, hero. All
Man,
the options have it now.
All of the above. You have to do all of them. I need an app that knows which apps I'm in to hit the thumbs up. Anyway.
Yeah, in all of them.
In all of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So now, now that you got your components placed, now just like kind of finish out the formalities, right? Like put the need at the top. I usually put the need above the map, or if I'm feeling really spicy, I'll put the need in one of the stages as well, but don't worry about it. Just put the need above the map and then put the user above that need. And then draw the relationships that you drew in your value chain just to finish it out. So user depends on need. And need depends on capabilities like wood chopping, apparently. All right. So if you got that far with me, you've made like a minimum viable map, and it's going to be extremely wrong, I assure you. But I promise you can get a lot out of just this artifact, right? So in my extremely like opinionated together alone mapping process, this is the part of the mapping process where I'd say, okay, now we're going to have some thinking time. And what we're going to do is use this table. I'm going to paste this table in underneath the fitness map. And you can get this table at lwm.events/opportunities. And it's just a list of prompts, basically, things that you can ask your map to interrogate your map, and hopefully get interesting answers that send you on some interesting adventures. So this is the opportunities prompt table. It's basically derived from Simon's climate, doctrine, and leadership tables. If you're following along from reading the book, it's just some of those things handpicked, turned into questions. So Rick, this is your moment to shine, right? So like the first one, reduce bias. Like this is where I want you to confront that question that you raised earlier. Is it the way that things are in my context, or is it the way things are outside in the wider world? So here's the prompt. Are we biased in how we approach this capability compared to others? If so, is that valuable or problematic? You know, if we treat a component like it's in stage 2, while the rest of the world assumes it's stage 4, what do they know that we don't? And so what I'm doing is I'm going through the map component by component and asking it questions from these opportunity prompts. So does that make sense? Like it's almost like a meditative practice where you're resting your attention on each part of the map, going, okay, go through the prompts. Is there anything here? And if there is, I'm going to write on the map and say, oh, there's an opportunity to reduce bias here. And so if I were doing this with a large group, normally I'd give them 5 minutes of silence and say, all right, go think. Go look for opportunities.
Bias towards what?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
I was saying when we're looking for biasness, bias towards what? I mean, what are they looking for?
Yeah, so in bias in general has a meaning that I think we all are generally thinking about. Yeah. Simon is using it in an evolution specific way. When he says reduce bias, he's thinking specifically about what the rest of the world is doing in the market, how they're treating this activity versus how we're doing it. So if we treat in the pot of the kettle of tea example, kettle of tea, you know what I mean? If we treat the kettle like it's custom built here, like we hand carve a kettle out of, I don't know, wood or something, which would be wild. And the rest of the world, meanwhile, has electric kettles that are just, you can buy off the shelf for a couple bucks, right? That's an instance of bias. The rest of the world is doing something one way in terms of evolution. They're treating it like a late stage 3, early stage 4 thing, whereas we are treating it like a custom built thing.
To come back to, I think what Wardley talks a lot about serverless, and he's saying, yeah, go build your own Kubernetes cluster while the world is already on to serverless, right?
Basically.
So the both ways bias can happen, right? One is your way versus the world's way, and second is also a time dimension, right? Bias towards the way things have been done so far. I always do it like that rather than how the world is moving forward. So there's a time dimension, there is a personal preference type of dimension. Okay.
Yep, 100%. And one of the things that Simon talks about there is the value of procrastination, which is one of the moves. One of the strategic plays is to procrastinate. It's like if you see things are going to end up a certain way, like, oh, like it kind of looks like serverless is going to be a thing for a lot of different kinds of workloads that we care about in the next 5 years. Maybe we shouldn't sink a bunch of money into a Kubernetes control plane. Like maybe we should just leapfrog it.
Christina is showing body behavior. There's no why in here.
but on the other hand,
you're mute, by the way, Christina.
Yeah, what I will say on the other hand is that you may be in the situation where a Kubernetes control plane is extremely important because you're not leapfrogging from modern practices to serverless. You're leapfrogging from legacy server practices into serverless. And so you're going to have to do a transition over time.
That's
All right.
not based on these arguments.
That's exactly what I'm experiencing. Working in German public sector, we're 2 generations behind when it comes to technology. So where do we aim? This is a very crucial question.
Yeah, like workload portability is like a really important thing if your workloads need to be portable. If they don't, I'm not sure why you're looking at containerization.
Yeah,
and
and to be honest, there's more to the map, right? What is the experience of the people? How is the structure of the company, right? Where's the experience? Can we hire? What's the money? There's more trade-offs there.
Yeah, and that's why in that prompt, the question is not it's not about doing what everybody else is doing. It's about doing what everybody else is doing if it makes sense, right? And the map is going to expose the parts of the system that are moving that will tell you whether or not it makes sense. Now, in our extremely simple map that we're making right now, maybe you'll have to get through a couple iterations to get to the details that will help you find the answer. But right now, with opportunities, you're just looking for like question mark areas on the map that make you go, huh? Like, what's there? Uh-oh, we might need to reduce bias there. That's a conversation that we should go have.
It's exactly what, I don't know who said it, Rick, or who said it, but putting a solution on the map, this is a huge problem. This is what just you did with this serverless or Kubernetes. Maybe you need an S3 bucket. So I don't know. And it would be a huge mistake to put it on that map.
It depends on your context. If you're a consultancy firm and people are actually doing a lot of homegrown Kubernetes, what do you need to do as a consultancy firm? That's the solution you want to go with.
Totally different question, because you have to do both of them. You have to learn what you mean with do. You have to learn both of them, and you have to learn S3 bucket too. It is a totally different question. The question is, what do I need to learn?
Yeah. Yep.
And you have to learn ACLs, I saw today in Slack. So there's a lot of things to learn, but Kubernetes or serverless is a solution, and this is what's happening in the companies. They don't see what is the problem space, what is the solution space, and they are pushing in one direction, either because hippo or because they don't know that they are doing a mistake. And then you are sitting on a huge AWS serverless Kubernetes, and you don't need it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, my hope is that it makes it conspicuous if you're doing it the wrong way, and that we'd have a conversation. But if you have bad dynamics in terms of conflict resolution, like you're still going to have bad dynamics with a map.
Yeah, I think one thing to point out is, like, Wardley maps will give you a lot of context and ability. Not everyone can process the Wardley map the way, right? So, but I will, like, for example, like, should we use Kubernetes and all this kind of thing? There's a lot of other mapping techniques that are very well structured and fed by and anchored if you have a Wardley map to back them up. And I'll give you an example is, you're making a decision, should we use serverless or Kubernetes or all these things, right? That inherently has a bias in, should we do it's a yes or no decision. And if you take the Wardley map and then say, and talk about the need and have a real structure, and then you say, I'm going to use that Wardley map as context to build an opportunity solution tree, where say our opportunity, I can see the opportunity is to make this change, right? And then use that to anchor and guide a discussion with the team and the business on an opportunity. We see this opportunity to make this change, right? We see a need, the market's changing, all this kind of stuff. So we want to say, so opportunity, we're looking for this outcome change, right? And so we want to see this measurable outcome difference, because we can see that's going to make a difference, and our Wardley map is kind of anchored that. Now, so here's the outcome we want to do. What are our options to, and, like, look at the gap we have, right? And so that's where you say there's a gap. Here's where we are. Here's ideally where we're, what are our options to narrow or close that gap? The moment you structure that, a solution team can be all over that. And it starts, and you can say, well, let's actually run some experiments. Like these are the top 3 options. What would we need? What experiment would we need to run to determine which of those options to de-risk our solution, de-risk our choice between those top 3? Suddenly, you've got people just really diving in, and because you've identified this opportunity and said, I want the outcome is here. This gap is here's where we are today, and ideally here's where we need to be. You've done that with the Wardley map to really anchor that into a clear point of change, right? Because that's what the Wardley map allows you to do. Now we're saying for that point of change, here's the outcome difference we're looking for, ideal in an ideal magic world. What are our opportunities to narrow or close that gap? You do that with a team. They're drilled in, focused. If they start getting lost in debating, you bring them back to the map and you say, here's why we're doing this. Let's dig back in. Those, and that's just one example of another tool, right? But that really allows you to take a strategic and tactical approach, right? So that's one example.
I think this is a perfect example with everything. You can see, you can imagine the whole strategy and the whole thinking, and this boundary, do not put solutions, but opportunities on it.
Yeah.
And show gaps. This is the most important thing.
I think part of the problem that I and many people have with Wardley maps is it's strategic, right? And getting people to take practical, measurable, day-by-day action and keeping their stuff. What's that tool? What's that thing in between that's right for your team, right for your context? One example I would really highly recommend as a default is the opportunity solution tree thinking, because that gets people practical, tactical, but you want to identify the opportunity. That's the thing that the Wardley map identifies, right? And really the outcome-based opportunity, the difference we're trying to make, right? In this area, we see this strategic thing. If we could just move this piece, we can see that strategic. The Wardley map's really highlighted that. Okay, so by doing that, we would see an outcome difference, right? So now you can identify that gap, that core gap, and write it as an outcome, right? Here's what we're looking for, this change. Today it's like this, ideally it's like that, right? And we can see this, the reason for that move is here. Now get people in really tactic. What are opportunities? They can take ownership. And they can take ownership in a way that if they're wrong, they come back, but they're really anchored back to that strategic difference they're trying to make, which is anchor them back to your Wardley map change. So those two things have a positive feedback loop. And I think finding something that has the right positive feedback loop at the tactical level is critical.
One thing I would caution though with that approach is that if you teach people to oversimplify reality, if you're not doing anything, right? I think the opportunity solutions tactics tree, like that's lovely, right? I've seen it used in a product context and it's fabulous. And I think like Wardley mapping is just one solution in a toolkit, right? Or one tool in a toolkit. You can use all sorts of things. And I love the combination too of those two tools together, because then you can have like clarity, simplicity, and then you can move to the Wardley map where it's like context and detail. The one thing that I would point out though is that I don't think it's just for strategy. Like it is an analytical method that is visualized, right? And so you can apply that at any level of detail or granularity. And oftentimes, like, I mean, man, I can make a map for shoveling snow, right? Like that map is not going to affect anyone but me. How much more tactical could you get? And it's not going to affect me any more than one Saturday morning whenever it's winter, right? So like, I really do think that you can make maps at different time spans of discretion to focus on like a management theory approach. But do people get practice to do that? And does the current way that Wardley mapping is done and the way that it's demonstrated and so on encourage that kind of exploration? I'm not sure. So I think that's probably a gap from the education standpoint for Wardley mapping. Like I think we need more examples of people making maps at a smaller like time span. And we also need more examples of people making maps at operational levels. And one of the theories around that Jay Bloom talks about is actually like focusing on executives not doing strategy, but executives doing options management. Like what capabilities do our organizations need in order to enable strategies that people, assuming a hierarchical organization, lower in that hierarchy or more towards the edge, are going to be making because they're more close to the information, right? And I think, like, how do you actually put that into practice? Well, you have to have people who are sensitized to those details, and maybe you can't always oversimplify at the edge. So that's the only thing I'd caution, but I do love that pairing. That's a really good pairing of tools.
Okay, so it's 15 minutes before the end. One final questions or thoughts. Are we finished, Ben, with the mapping for now? I think so.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing I would say is that from here, right, you've got one map iteration done, right? And it's really small and it's really wrong. And maybe you found something and maybe you didn't, right? So as you were going through the opportunities table, this is just like boiled down Wardley, right? So it's like the most basic of basic kind of explorations. What you would do next is you'd say, did I get something interesting enough that I can go take action on? If the answer is no, then what I would recommend is consider making a new map for a new context, or one that you found that you cared about as a result of making this map. Focus on a different user, focus on a different need, or maybe add a component, maybe remove a component. Basically, you can step through and incrementally step through your knowledge of like iterating on the map itself. But the whole point is that you find out things that help you take action and put it into the world. I think like one of the biggest problems with Wardley mapping right now, from a practitioner standpoint, is that people stay in the world of like, oh, I have such an interesting intellectual thing to say based on this Wardley map that I made. And I'm like, do something or stop talking. Because at some point you have to act and get the results of the map. Otherwise, you're just theorizing, and that's nice, I guess, for you. But the world needs action in a lot of cases. It needs well thought action and careful design. But people do get stuck instead of acting. So I'd say aim for action in order to get value from the process, and then iterate, add things, remove things, throw away your map, do it again. Throwing away your map is totally fine. So this is just the beginning of the journey for you. The hope is that mapping is a sustainable activity, right? It's an everyday thing you can do. It's not a huge heavy lift every time. You get value from it every time. And if you're not having that experience, I think maybe something's wrong. And so like email me and I'll try to help you figure that part out.
Great.
Do we want to do like questions or something? Or
yeah,
what do you think, Kenny?
One final questions, we can do it, right? We have 12 minutes to the end.
Sure.
Is there more one burning question?
I do have a question, Ben, and this is related to the map. So the map that we did, I don't know if you can see it, but on my map, where is it?
Nope.
Sorry. So under, all right. So Dinkar wants
if
to
you put it in front of your face, it sometimes will actually work.
Yeah, due to probably the background and not because of that, maybe.
It just worked. It worked in a second.
Hold on a second. Let me be more natural than this. Might be better. Okay. Now there's no background here. All right. So can you see it?
I can.
All right. So maybe read it. It's better. So Dinkar, needs to become strong.
Yep.
For that, I need strength training. Okay. And I have 4 requirements there: a nutritional plan, which I've kept at Genesis because it needs to be specific to me. Then I've kept separate called weight training. All right. Mm-hmm. The third one, an endurance sport. And there's a 4th one, recording training, or probably something related with measurements. Okay. And then for training, for example, one of that, I went down saying I need a training plan.
Yep.
Yeah. And I need a gym and I need exercise. The 3 things, the way I put. Now, the question is, where do I stop? Now, this itself becomes a need. This itself is a need, right? Training plan. Now, is that a need and I'll start exploring this further? Or
oh, yeah.
That's always been a case, up to which depth do you go and stop and start acting? I mean, of course, training plan, I can just borrow from internet. I can start looking at other things, etc., like that. So where do we stop?
Yeah, this is such a good question. And I know, Kenny, you've probably seen things and other people here who facilitate work sessions where like the scope could always keep expanding. Mm-hmm. As facilitators, you have to say things like, well, we need to contain that and keep it moving, right? We have to actually end at some point. But as ongoing practitioners, the truth of the matter is we could keep going forever. Exactly. And that's why I emphasize the importance of action. And brutally, I would say that that Wardley mapping is about creating knowledge in order to create power. If you know things that other people do not know, from a competitive standpoint, that creates the opportunity for asymmetry as long as you take action based on that knowledge. From an internal perspective, like what you're really aiming for is just extreme competence, right? Like you're not competing with anyone except maybe yourself, right? Like you're just trying to get a handle on the situation, understand what other people do, sure, but you want to understand how this thing is supposed to work. So from that standpoint, I'd say stop digging whenever you've got something that works well enough for you. And as soon as you notice that something hurts, like in a certain way, like a Wardley map is like it's the difference between going to a doctor and saying, ow, right? And saying, my elbow hurts. Like I've made the map that is able to identify the part of my body where things hurt, and being able to articulate that and focus on that and work on a solution that is oriented around the problem of my elbow specifically hurting is going to be great, right? But yeah, so I would say stop whenever you've got enough, and whatever enough is the action that you can take and the consequences that you're getting from that. From a competitive standpoint, though, what I would emphasize is that the closer you look and the deeper you dig, the more you're going to find and the more opportunities to consider. And I almost view Wardley mapping as a semi-predictable discovery mechanism for moves to make. Mm-hmm. One of Simon's moves that he talks a lot about, and he uses the example of, I'm not sure if it was Netflix or what it was, but he's got this on his blog somewhere. Basically, there's a move called the Fool's Mate in his lexicon, and it's about manipulating constraints, right? And the only way you find constraints to manipulate, or underlying dependencies to manipulate, is if you dig down and down and down. And there's a direct versus an indirect way of competing, right? Direct methods is like wanting to launch your own Netflix in order to compete with, the current content aggregators. Indirect is messing with the tools that creative studios use in order to produce content and get talent and all this kind of stuff in order to feed into the content aggregators. And it's an indirect move, and it might take a long time to work, but the only way you're going to find that move is if you're digging deep. And yeah, there's a whole like lovely thing, I think, with some of you may have heard me like go off about conditions and consequences thinking, where we're not like doing a von Clausewitz version of strategy where we're trying to seize the initiative and control everything and deal with friction and all this kind of stuff. The alternative is more like Sun Tzu, and there's a book called Deciphering Sun Tzu that focuses on this by Derek MC Yuan, which I highly recommend people read because it's basically Taoism for strategy and thinking about how to engage with the world in a way that focuses on cultivating the conditions that produce the consequences that we want by implication, instead of trying to control everything. So that's an important distinction. And I think mapping helps us pay attention to conditions. Mm-hmm. And you can't design conditions until you can pay attention to them.
You need awareness, right? Unless you can be aware of that, then you'll. Okay, great. Thank you.
So Ben, I think some of that you kind of addressed the question I was saying in that answer, but maybe you can address it more explicitly. So, which is using Wardley mapping, and how that fits to the kind of like plan, do, check, adjust cycle of things, right? Because really that's I think that's if you want to say get action, like just get it to the point where you take action. If you can have it fit in that context where this is a plan, do, check, adjust cycle, where I'm going to take this Wardley mapping enough to decide what action to take, and then keep it filtered, keep revisiting it in that plan, do, check, adjust pattern, then you can just get enough clarity to make a decision and know that you're going to revisit it. So what's your kind of insight around that and how to make that more explicit in this is our pattern?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I tend, so my bias in this world is that I tend to work with dysfunctional organizations, and not, I hope none of my clients are watching this. I'm kidding about you. You're not dysfunctional. No, I tend to work with the enterprise, right? And the enterprise tends to be messy, right? And it's not to say that excellence can't occur in the enterprise. I just think that sometimes when things get too big, they become very like it's very easy for something that's too big to understand to eventually over time drift and become unintentional. But what I think I'm noticing too is that it seems like you often are coming from a context where you have very strong practices and you have at least the intent to design working agreements that are focused on experimentation. And so like there is that looping, right? Like if you talk to like John Cutler at Amplitude, like all about experimentation, right? Like you're talking about, are the metrics going up or down? Here's my hypothesis. I think that if we do this, the result will be that. And we're going to run this experiment for 2 weeks and we'll see what happens. Like, I think that kind of mindset is really great for certain classes of problems. And do you, let me just say, this is funny. Do you speak Cynefin? Is that
I do a little bit. Yes. Yeah, I do.
It's super fun. Like, which by the way, I'm not sure any of us should be learning Welsh, but this sidebar. You have to take very different approaches depending on which kind of ontological domain you're in, right? So in Cynefin, if you're in an ordered domain where cause and effect can be known upfront with enough analysis, yeah, you're going to do like a certain kind of experimentation that has a certain kind of structure and feel to it. If, however, you're not doing an ordered domain, if you're not in an ordered domain, but instead you're in an area of uncertainty where you have no clue what's going to work, and you have to actually just boldly step forward and poke the system to see what it does and then respond rapidly to that, well, then your cycle is going to look a little bit different, right? Because you're not just doing one experiment to see like what happens. You're doing many experiments and you're poking all over the place to see which one starts to create a new stability. And so like plan, do, check, act is not what that looks like. Like it's like way messier than that. And like you can start to look at like safe to fail experiments. Simon's modeled his strategy cycle thing after OODA. So John Boyd's observe, orient, decide, and act. And I think there are many lovely ways that OODA and PDCA or PDSA, whichever way you go, tend to, I think there's some overlaps there. But one thing that you could do now is you could go look up Commando Dev on Twitter. The guy's name is Ben Ford. He makes a lot of content about OODA in particular. And OODA is way messier than 4 steps. It is way messier and it involves a lot more work in the orientation and sense-making part of things before you get to action. So my long-winded version of what I think the answer to your question might be is I love that kind of experimental loop. I think that sense-making ends up being way messier in complex domains in particular. And so like I have a fear of oversimplifying the loop, I guess. Like it's completely possible that you go start doing sense-making activities and go, oh my gosh, our world has changed as a result of what we've just learned. And
yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, I plan to check act as a way to simplify my question more than anything. But yeah,
good,
I do deal with complex organizations and change.
Of course, really, yeah.
And that's the thing is, the moment you make a change in a complex system,
yep.
Right? If you're not aware, if you don't have that cycle built in, where like then you're gonna like unexpected changes will happen. Things you can't have sent, you can't have predicted, right? It's a complex.
Yeah, I mean, even just looking at it, if you show up, they're like, ah.
Yeah, but honestly, sometimes even if you just manage to make a Wardley map and show it to and the obvious pain, and just point at the obvious pain, and everyone goes yes. Sometimes that sends enough of a ripple effect in that everything else that you're gonna decide to do shifts. Like everyone starts taking action. Like they just start taking their own individual action, and it's random. Like so. And that's not a bad thing, right? But like, so not everyone, but like all it takes is a few key people to start like, well, yeah, that sounds great. We're just perfect. We're doing some change. You find out 3 weeks later that they're just on it, right? Which is great. But, if you just say, okay, now we've done this and we're going to make this strategy, it's moving on you, right?
Yeah, that's the conversation people don't want to have about autonomy, right?
But that's a great thing. So having that's what I'm saying is having that cycle, right, of revisiting the map and having that we're doing something, we've made a decision, like you say, have a bias towards action, because otherwise you might as well throw it out. People get annoyed having meetings that give no results. So find some quick win, find some momentum, find something where they feel they have control. Yeah. It's important, but also come back to it. Say like, yes, this healthy, I can't remember the buzzword people use about this, virtuous cycle where you say, I chose to do something, it had an impact, and now I can choose to do something else and have another impact. And I feel like I can take control. Getting them in that control cycle where they feel they can have an impact on such a horrible, complex system is probably the biggest value, but also coming back and deciding how well that impact worked.
That's belief.
Critical,
right?
Right?
Yeah, it's belief and it did the right thing.
Yeah, and even if it did the wrong thing, it's coming back and saying that didn't do what we expected, and here's why. Now that we've revisited, oh wait a minute, we discovered something. That saying like that didn't do what we want, but the discovery is where the value is. So really bringing that value back to people is kind of the critical, like and the plan, do, check, act, or the OODA loop or anything. It's really much more about getting to the point where they make a decision and feel they have some control, and then seeing what impact that has and why. That's really, within every organization it's different, but getting to that quickly is where the value is.
Yeah,
that's kind of my experience.
These things just, it's so hard with humans, right? Because we don't make that change overnight, and the sustainability of transformation work is like, whoa, how do you get there from here?
Yeah, and in a large organization, the gap between deciding and actually having that is huge, right? So maybe finding those smaller actions to take, just to get the feel as an organization that this system of thinking works for us is probably, I think, that muscle memory is probably more critical in a large organization than actually making some grandiose, unless you have a senior stakeholder, a hippo that can just say that's what we're doing and enforcing it. Finding that smaller action to take is probably healthier in a lot of contexts, right?
It's training people to believe that what they do matters.
Exactly.
And one of the things my good friend Kat Sotel says is maps can have expiration dates. So discard by, right? Because they're expiring because our understanding of the situation is changing. The situation itself is changing. But I tend to have a bias to say that the maps expire the moment you leave the door, right? You walk out of the room. That's not always the case. I think when there are systems that we need to proliferate a common understanding of how this thing is working, like, yes, I think there could be a long-lived map and it increments and improvements and so on. But a lot of time I kind of just view the map as a social lubricant of sorts. Like it's just, look, we need the right set pieces on the stage so that we can communicate to the audience what play we're putting on, right? It's the props for the conversation. And so there's some tension here, I think, too, with around like maps help you with long-term strategy and making good decisions. I also think they just help people talk better. So a little bit of both, not all one or not all the other.
Yeah. I think that's what Simon also said, right? It's the mapping, it's the journey, not the artifact. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's 9:03.
I got too excited.
Yeah, well, that's always the case. But I think we're stopping it here, and we might organize another one maybe in a month or 1.5 months or 2 months to go through several more of these collaborations and maybe actually try them. So let's check that one up then if people.
Yeah, I'd be happy to try that. That'd be fun.
Yeah, same here. There's a lot of interesting still there on the list I want to dive into. But thank you very much, Ben. And I would like to thank everyone for their interaction, for their questions, for their input. I really enjoyed it myself, this interactive play. And thank you everyone for tuning in, listening, and well, hope to see you next time. And by this, I'm gonna stop the live stream and we can chat a bit more in this Zoom chat. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.